Negotiations over the weekend have secured a 60-day extension to last year's Black Sea grain deal that allows Ukraine to export wheat and cereals to global markets. The extension comes amid heightened tensions between Russia and the West. Russian President Vladimir Putin has seen a mix of good and bad news in recent days, from welcoming one of his closest partners, Chinese President Xi Jinping, to being hit with an international arrest warrant from the ICC. Speaking after their meeting in Moscow, President Putin and Xi reiterated his longtime support for Russia and his ideas to bring peace to Ukraine. Meanwhile, the Kremlin says that on Saturday, Russian President Vladimir Putin made a surprise visit to the Ukrainian city of Mariupol, which saw heavy fighting last year before falling to the Russian military. Moscow also warned NATO that it will destroy fighter aircraft given to Ukraine. Slovakia and Poland recently announced they would be sending fighter jets to Ukraine in a bid to shore up its air defenses. Last week, a Russian plane brought down a U.S. drone in the Black Sea in the first direct confrontation between Russia and America since the conflict began last year. And to further discuss the extension of the grain deal and the latest developments in Ukraine, joining me now from London is Manas Chawla. He is the CEO of London Politica. And from Brussels, Amanda Paul. She is a senior policy analyst at the European Policy Centre. A warm welcome to you both, and thanks for joining me on Straight Talk. Amanda, let me begin with you. The grain deal has been extended for 2 months, 60 days shorter than the originally agreed. What's your take on that?
I mean, I think it's great that it's been extended for 60 days, but this isn't very long. We need to have it extended for a much longer period. But obviously, the Russians are trying to use this situation as a way to leverage in order to get some of the sanctions that were placed on them lifted.
So, Manas, we've already seen some impact in the markets to the extension with food prices falling. Is this more of a short-term trend, as Amanda mentioned, or can this continue well into the year?
I think it certainly will continue well into the year. I mean, the Black Sea Grain Initiative, it was agreed to originally in July, and it's had a huge impact. It's enabled Ukraine to send over 25 million tons of grain and edible oils. It's effectively eased pressure on global food crisis and prevented multiple crises from developing countries. Countries that suffer with food insecurity, countries like Yemen and Somalia that rely heavily on these supplies. But of course, like Amanda mentioned, Russia is really trying to leverage this to unblock flows of Russian food and fertilizer to world markets. And it's unclear whether this deal might go beyond the 60 days that we have it for right now.
So, meanwhile, Amanda, what do you make of the recent incident? Some have called it a clash between Russia and the U.S. When a U.S. drone was downed by a Russian plane over the Black Sea.
I mean, I think this was done on purpose by the Kremlin as a way to increase its anti-Western narrative in Russia. If you are following the story, the pilots who actually shot down the American drone were awarded for this act. So it was sold very much as another story about US aggression, the United States wanting to destroy Russia and whatnot. So it's a way to increase the sort of support for Russia's war against Ukraine and increase anti-American sentiment.
So, Manas, is the Black Sea likely to become a new flashpoint in the ever-worsening relations between Russia and the West?
It might well do. I mean, the biggest risk here is the risk of a miscalculation, not of either side intentionally, provoking the other, but really the risk that we miscalculate either how Russia will react to us shooting down a Russian plane or to a country with neutral airspace whose airspace is wrongfully moved upon. And it's also particularly, I think, coming at the right time with the message that Putin wants to send home, a message of sort of defiance and deterrence to the West after Poland and Slovakia have agreed to ship warplanes in this fight.
So we know that Moscow has responded to Poland and Slovakia's decision to send aircraft to fend off Russian offensive, that it will destroy the planes. So are tensions set to escalate further?
I mean, it's a particularly historic decision, right? Poland is the first nation since Russia's invasion to meet Ukraine's request to deliver warplanes. And my sources tell me that Finland, the Netherlands, other NATO members are also considering similar transfers. This crosses a threshold in sending firepower to Ukraine, and many Western allies have drawn the line here. But it's also worth noting that all these requests they fall short of fulfilling Kiev's demands for American F-16s, which so far Biden has still been very hesitant on. The Germans have still been recalcitrant on. So what we do know is really the critical point is when the West does or doesn't decide to send F-16s, when we can see an escalation of tensions.
So, Amanda, how has the ICC's decision to issue an arrest warrant for Russian President Putin worsened the situation?
I mean, first of all, I think it was a great decision. I mean, Russia has been carrying out war crimes in Ukraine since the first day of the war, so it's very positive that this happened. I think, of course, the Russians will say that it increases tensions with the West, and it probably will, but that's not a reason for it having not to have done it. I think it should mark the first step in a process which will go much further, and all political will needs to be done to actually make Russia face justice for the war crimes and crimes of aggression that they've carried out against the Ukrainian people.
So, Manas, right after this decision by the ICC, Russian President Vladimir Putin made a surprise visit to the port city of Mariupol over the weekend, which saw most of the fighting last year. Was Putin trying to send a message?
He was, and he was sending a message not only to the West, but to the audience back home. Effectively, these sort of visits are all for the cameras. It's a show of strength for Putin to show his, domestic audience back home that he's undeterred, unfazed by the arrest warrant issued for war crimes. It's to send the message that not only is it business as usual for him, but that he can go wherever he wants, including into mainland Ukraine. And it's also worth noting that, throughout this war, Putin has mainly been in Moscow. He hasn't gone to the front lines really, and this sort of visit to Mariupol really changes that, puts him on the same stead with Zelensky, who often goes to the front lines to boost the morale of his troops.
So, in the meantime, Amanda, last week, Turkey has decided to ratify Finland's NATO membership. How do you think this will impact relations between Ankara and Moscow?
I mean, I think it's great news that Ankara made this decision. I guess it's something that the Russians expected. I mean, Turkey's a NATO member, and I think it was clear from the beginning that the main issue wasn't actually with Finland, it was more with Sweden. So I don't think it's going to have any significant impact on Turkey's relationship with Russia. I mean, the relationship is very important for the Kremlin in many different ways. So it's advantageous for both Putin and President Erdogan to maintain the sort of pragmatism that's defined this relationship for a long time.
So, Manas, is Russia offended with this move? And what do you think? I mean, how does the U.S. view Turkey's approval of Finland's membership, but its postponement of the other, Sweden?
Yeah, I mean, the U.S. certainly isn't in favor of that. It would love to sort of widen NATO insofar as it, widens their strategic goals. But obviously, Turkey has its own problems with countries like Sweden and is effectively successful in decoupling the membership applications of Finland and Sweden. I think it's important to note that this comes into the context of Turkey, towing a really precarious line. It supported Ukraine, including with weapons early in the war, but it's not joined Western sanctions against Russia, and it's allowed Russian military and civilian planes to traverse its airspace. I think Turkey will continue to pave its own independent path as long as it can in this war.
So, Amanda, China's President Xi Jinping, prior to his meeting with his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, said the Ukrainian crisis may be solved if common security is provided. What did he mean by that?
I mean, I'm not sure it's entirely sure what he was really thinking when he said that, but I mean, based on the details of the sort of peace initiative that he has put forward, I mean, it's a very unrealistic plan, so to speak. And I think his visit to Moscow is an effort actually more to double down on the relationship with Russia and gain some of the extra things that China wants from its relationship with Russia, rather than being any sort of scenario for a real peace deal between the two. I mean, peace is only going to come to Ukraine when the Ukrainians are able to negotiate from a position of strength. The way the Chinese view it is about Russia maintaining territory that it currently occupies and Russian troops on the ground. I don't see that as any sort of viable peace solution at all.
So, Manas, China has come off the back of brokering a deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran just recently. So, is Beijing likely to become a new facilitator between Russia and Ukraine?
It's unlikely that this is a entirely new foreign policy tilt. It's more the case that it's pushed into a corner where it doesn't want to alienate Europe. It wants to protect its economic interests in Russia, and so effectively Xi's playing, sort of taking a page straight from other Chinese leaders. And playing the sort of historic mediator. He wants both sides to come to the negotiating table. He talks in sort of constructivist language of finding a rational way out. But he also has his own goals. I think Xi's mediation initiatives, both in the Middle East and his visit to Moscow, will find some success in elevating the prestige of Chinese diplomacy, particularly in the developing world, most of which remains undecided in this war.
So, Amanda, with this, has Russia become more reliant on China?
Absolutely. I mean, as long as the war continues and Russia will become more reliant on China, this is extremely dangerous. I mean, Russia has basically become a junior partner to the Chinese. I mean, the Chinese haven't yet agreed to provide the Russians with, lethal aid. Whether they will or not will have major consequences, because if they do, they will be slapped with new sanctions. But I mean, the longer Russia continues down this road, the weaker it will become in terms of ties with China.
So, Manas, what would a prolonged war mean for the both allies, and what are their shared interests in this?
I mean, everyone's shared interests, primarily those that are not involved in the war directly, are economic. Those that do business with Russia want the sanctions to come off as smoothly and as quickly as possible so they can resume their operations in the country. Others want to resume operations with Ukraine. But I'd also sort of be a bit careful about how we talk about the situation, because Xi really is, I think, trying to play the middle ground here. Although, strategically, its incentives line a lot more with Russia, obviously. Xi might also hold a phone call discussion with President Zelensky after his visit to Moscow. Zelensky was given qualified support to Xi's peace plan, saying it was not bad when it was released in February, and he noted the need to respect Ukraine's territorial sovereignty.
Yes. All right, Manas and Amanda, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk.